Thank you very much for that. So thank you to everyone who came out tonight. I know there's friends, family in the room. I'm so happy to know so many faces, and I look forward to meeting a few of you afterwards that I don't know. And thank you for missing the president-elect. No, she's not president-elect yet. But tonight's the acceptance speech, right? Of Hillary Clinton. And I came here instead. For those of you who are planning to watch it later. Okay, so I'm Nicole Archer. I teach in history and theory of contemporary art at the San Francisco Art Institute. That is where I met Thomas. Will be formal this evening, Thomas Van Houten. Tonight's plan is that Thomas and I are going to just have like a brief conversation. The other day, rather, I came through here and got to have kind of a private conversation with Thomas about the work that kind of went all over the place. It was a really fun conversation. It was really thoughtful work, and it has a lot of different angles that we can explore. The thought is we're going to try to reproduce that to a certain extent. I've been thinking a little bit more about some of the things that we spoke about that day. There will certainly be time at the end for questions and answers, but as many of you in the room know, I love running things kind of seminar style. And I asked Thomas, and he would be totally comfortable if people want to just raise their hands or interrupt or ask a question rather than holding things till the end of the discussion. I'll do the work of moderating, so you don't have to do that. So if you do have something you want to ask or add while we're speaking, just kind of raise your hand, and I'll call on you. And if you start to back up, I'll call on you in order or something like that. If you're happy to just kind of listen to Thomas speak and answer the questions that I have for him and the ideas I throw at him, we can just hold the Q&A until the very end. But we can be somewhat free-form in that regard. What else do I want to say before we get started? So, well, you've already started to mention this, Zach, but not only am I super excited and super proud to be in conversation with Thomas because I've been a long admirer of his work, and I don't know that we share the same vocabularies. I'm a writer and you're a sculptor, but I think we do share some similar interests and things like that. So I really like thinking with your work. In particular, I'm also really interested to be having this conversation at the Canessa Gallery. This is a very haunted building. This is a very haunted block. We're literally at ground zero for Bohemian San Francisco. Zach's already mentioned us, the Black Cat Cafe, which was downstairs, was a bohemian haunt. It opened after the earthquake. Then it was a beat haunt. Then it was one of the first kind of pre-Stonewall bars. Much of the homophile movement came from downstairs this building. Up the street where the Transamerica building is now, that was the Monkey Block, or the Montgomery Block. And that was a multi-use kind of office building that a lot of the newspapers, a very literary town, a lot of the newspapers were up there. And Mark Twain resided there for a minute, but also Capo's, this really famous bohemian restaurant that Javier Martinez and a bunch of people used to hang out at, was all right there. It survived the 1906 earthquake, so this really was that heart and soul. Somewhere in between, and I love this story, in 1882, across the street from this building, a group of young bohemians lived, the young bohemians who actually helped start the Art Institute, a group of painters who came up from New York. And they hosted what is now one of the most infamous kind of dinner parties of this kind of early artistic culture here in San Francisco. It was a dinner party in the honor of Oscar Wilde. And so whenever I walk down this block, I think of Oscar's ghost also mingling with us. So he had come to San Francisco, the Bohemian Club, which was already in existence, and invited him out. And he was a little I thought this place was supposed to be kind of wild, He was a bit disappointed. And he showed up to their dinner party, and they had gone to great extents to decorate the place in what they thought would be a proper Oscar Wilde kind of fashion. And he said, "Oh, finally I'm home. Okay, Bohemia does exist, out here on the western coast of the United States." So this is there's a lot of power, a lot of really creative power on this block. Those are the old ghosts. The more recent ghosts, and I think the one in particular that haunts this show the most explicitly would be the ghost of my very beloved colleague and your very beloved mentor, Richard Berger, of course, right? So unfortunately, this was before my time. I know Prosthetic Temple was installed here, and you helped to install that work.
Which is when I first met Zach.
That's right. So it comes full circle, right? And so the plan is to address Richard's work at certain points in the conversation, but of course you want to summon the very powerful and very creative presence of Richard as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, I came back specifically, and at one point I'd done a bed of nails that I used as a sort of indexical kind of measuring of my body. And at one point I thought, God, this is Richard off. And so I thought, okay, they're asking. And so I sat down with him and I said, Richard, I'm afraid this is a Richard Berger ripoff. He said, no, lots of artists do indexical. And then really, that one phrase really comes into play, particularly with the hanging sloop thing, with this notion of indexical measurement as a way of kind of trying to come to terms with something. He'd done a couch where he made a grid of threads with lead weights that marked out a couch, and he used those to mark the surface of the couch. And he used to say when he took the couch away, 95% of what the couch was gone, but what remained was in some ways more real than the couch itself. So that's definitely carries through what's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I start with the mention of ghosts, not because I do happen to be a little macabre, but which I am, but because I think if there is any kind of really one primary theme that's working through all three of the pieces, and there are three distinct pieces here. This is kind of like a three-piece suite, right? We have the suit with the kind of attachments, the indexical markers, right? The photographs, which we can talk about in the way that they work on their own, and also vis-a-vis the history of photography. And then, of course, this kinetic sculpture that's in the very middle here. But one thing that kind of runs through all of them, of course, is the way that you're kind of dealing with the presence of absence, or, you know, what a philosopher would probably call the presence of absence, right? The way that something's meaning is its most poignant meaning, even. Its most powerful meanings are often owed not necessarily to that which is most immediate to the thing, or to the event, or to life even, but the things that haunt it, right? So we've already started to talk a little bit about Richard, and I think there's some very obvious ways that his influence haunts the work. But I thought maybe we just open up by talking a little bit about like what was haunting you when you did this work, or you know, what are kind of some of those present absences that help inform it.
Well, I think initially I was starting to think about this notion about floating in the water. For me, which seemed like a very almost metaphysical sort of existential state. On the border, on the surface, you know, where we're kind of mitigating two worlds in a way. Certainly metaphor to consciousness and subconsciousness. But when you're floating, you're very present with your breath because it controls your location. If you exhale, you sink. And so in that process, your breath is very foremost in your consciousness. And your ears are generally under the water, so you're cut off from sound and you're into another world. So there's a very, to me, it very much defines that kind of transition. And I had also really thought about some of Richard's words about respiration. To talk about respiration as a kind of natural cycle that carries over to many things. And so for me, I started thinking about that, and the show that I had here in 2013 was about a scale that I made, again with a suspended body. And the subtle thing that I got out of doing that piece that kind of was separate from the theory behind the work itself was the motion, that rocking back and forth against a pivot. So when you have a beam scale, you have what you're weighing, and then you have your referential standard weight that is being moved back and forth. And then to get them to balance, you move it back and forth until they rock back and forth. And that subtle rocking, to me, really made me think of ascension and descension. And so ascension being largely a spiritual reference, you know, any person ascending or descending after they die, in relation to judgment, but how those metaphors carry through to so many things in our language now. We frequently hear about ascending spiritually, and also descending into depravity, descending into madness, as a sort of up and down cycle that has crossovers to mental health, morality, spirituality, mental health, physical health. It's just, I found it to be a very broad and sort of pleasing metaphor. For me, starting with some sort of a central idea like that is often fruitful.
It's interesting, right? Because I like hearing, and I don't think you mentioned, we talked about this the other day, that this is the extension of a work where at first it's kind of ascension and descension are the results of the primary thing that you're exploring, judgment, right? But there, through that exploration, comes the secondary or extended body work where you find yourself interested in, ascension or descension itself, not as a product of something else. And that's not an easy task to think how you visualize that, right? Because it's a performative, kind of active gesture, ascension or descension. I mean, and that brings me to one of the things I wanted to talk about, which is a lot of your work is kinetic, but there's some interesting kind of kinetic things going on.
Kinetic things are difficult for me to deal with. Mm-hmm. Far more often, the work is potentially kinetic and not actually actively kinetic. Frequently find that kinetic work becomes more about the movement than about the theoretical or metaphorical content. And so in this case, it really worked for me because the movement was the metaphor. So it worked in a different kind of way.
It's interesting how you worked it out too. Who here has tried to activate the sculpture? One of the things I found really interesting about that is it kind of the process of performatively taking up the, what do you call it, the button? Okay, I can call it that. It's like there's probably some other name for it. Okay, the button. The act of taking up the button and activating the sculpture. There's a lot of, maybe I'm just like a weak art historian who sits at her computer all day long, which is true, but there's a lot of resistance there in that button. That's a tough little, you have to commit to kind of make it work. And that, interestingly enough, I think would be one of the other major themes that I think, not just this work, but a lot of your, and this is where our shared vocabularies kind of come together. Like this notion of resistance, the notion of how we put ourselves in positions to think about resistance or to work through resistance, and that's often through restraint, right? So the aesthetic vocabularies that you're borrowing from and adapting and developing all on your own in order to produce this work have a lot of like really interesting,
I just want to work through my resistance.
How many years is?
I would just like to say very, very quickly, though, a lot of this is about floating. And floating, which is at the border of like sea and air, is often a religious experience. I mean, and we are from the ocean, and that borderline between water and air is everything in life.
Yeah, I think this being a buoyancy suite, right? Like, and this building itself makes me think a lot about the crossovers between air and ocean. Okay, let's follow this. Okay, so I got 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I have to add something to this. The monkey block was floated on a raft of redwood logs in the sand. And the Transamerica is floated on a big pad. It doesn't have pilot. And this building was floated on a ship. And it was a Chinese laundry, and it was a ship. And it's in the water. The shoreline of the bay was over there. And the flotation part of this story is linked to the buildings that are floating on it.
Yeah, they moored the ships. So like the coastline of San Francisco is, you know, the park on Kearney and Clay, that was kind of essentially where the coastline, that was the center of San Francisco. That was the first place on the American flag was the, place. So for America, that was the center of San Francisco. For other people who inhabited it previously, otherwise. But yeah, that was the coastline, right? And so they pulled the ships up, they moored them, and then it was trash that kind of filled it in between. So that's absolutely true. There was a hand here.
I don't know if I have a specific question, but I'm just thinking of when you're talking about ascension and descension in terms of the spiritual sort of connotations which date back to who knows when, I sort of find this contradiction a little bit in the work that I feel like as you're almost trying to breathe, right? Especially with this one where we're floating in water and it's like I'm just going to do this thing where that allows me to breathe and play, and you're still in control, right? But ascension or descension in the spiritual sense occurs when you're no longer breathing. So I just think that I'm wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, because it's sort of you're referencing the spiritual thing that occurs after death, which is after not breathing, yet these sculptures/devices are letting you be in control of your breathing, and so I'm a little curious to hear you talk about that.
Well, I think it's interesting, like John Roloff, as you heard earlier, I was talking to him, and one of the things that I found is probably really central to me is that I went through a period when I was 19 after a bad car accident where I was hospitalized 7 times in a year. And particularly in the first couple, I had several surgeries back to back. But I had some pretty dramatic out-of-body experiences with all the morphine. And to the point where I had memories of hovering over the operating table while I was being worked on. And I had some really kind of deeply disturbing moments where I felt separated from my body, and that body was in a sort of tenuous state, like it might not survive, and sort of where would I be without it? And so these notions about how do we come to terms with, or how do we even process that information, I think in a lot of ways it has a kind of deeply hysterical reaction, for some people. And much of what I'm interested in, particularly with belts and vacant figure, is this notion that we form an identity and a belief system that caters to what we find tolerant. So thinking about death and thinking about existential states is something that I became interested in, particularly with the horizontal figure. And so kind of these ideas about when are you alive and when are you not, and what makes you alive and how do you define when you're alive and how do you define when you're dead is I think the kind of thing that people grasp for when they're trying to come to terms with those feelings.
Well, in a lot of ways, this does capture or expand the breath, right? Like, so to your point, like, while it's moving, maybe, but like, there is this way in which there is this kind of capturing or suspension, maybe,
Tom, you alluded to your earlier project with your balance beam and how that evolved kind of into this. I think it's a fascinating story behind that piece.
Yeah.
And you want to explain that to your group here.
Well, that piece was a scale that was based on, I'd read a story about a man who was weighing people at the time of death to try and find proof of the soul. His idea was that if a person died on a scale and it became lighter, the only thing that was leaving was the soul. And so he weighed 6 people at the time of death and came up with different results in each case. But he still published a study in the American Journal of Medicine saying that he conclusively found the weight of the soul at 21 grams. So for me, this was a complete act of validation. He was a doctor, and at these patients' moment of death, he was much more concerned with